Right. So, welcome to the Buscuit Tin and Biscuit. This is a spoken word performance, but it has some jokes. And one of the challenges that I've got as I'm developing this show is making sure that I remember the jokes. But I do remember this first joke, which is the Buddha. The Buddha says that we become the thing that we most resist, which in my case I think means I've been pushing really hard against a fat Yorkshireman. That's what I am. I'm a fat Yorkshireman. I'm going to tell you a few other things about me as part of the introduction. Why me? Why should I be telling you anything about the Buscuit Tin and the Biscuit, which is about creativity and doing things? Well, I've got a degree in philosophy, so I think about things probably more than I should. I've recently written a book which is I'm just about to sign a contract and get it published. And when I was writing that book, I came across this idea of the Buscuit Tin and Biscuit, which I think needs to be told to a wider audience. And so that's why me. Why you? You might be thinking this now. I'm just a couple of minutes into the show. Why me? Why do I have to listen to this? Well, I think the reason is that this show is very generally about problems and issues that we have when we try and do something creative. And I don't want to kind of talk about creativity with like a big capital C. This is really just more generally problems and issues that we have with doing things that are new or slightly unfamiliar. And so I would bet that in your life you've probably done something that is new and unfamiliar. You've probably tried to create something, and I bet that sometimes when you've tried to do those things, you've encountered problems and difficulties. And one of the ways you might have dealt with those problems and difficulties is you might have given up. And that's something that we're going to talk about. Why that happens, how we might get past those difficulties and not give up so often, maybe. So that's why you. Why now? Well, this is an interesting one. There's a joke that I'm supposed to tell at this point, which is, they say there's no time like the present, and some people say there's no present like time. But it's a fucker to rap. Mm-hmm. And why now? Why should we be talking about creativity and doing things right at this particular moment? And I think there is a really, really interesting answer to this, which is we seem to be at this point of like, maybe there's a crisis in creativity. Maybe there's a crisis in actually anybody having to do things. I've seen some crazy headlines just recently where headlines that seem like they should be from The Onion, if you know what The Onion is, a kind of satirical website. Somebody who's the head of a hedge fund saying that all jobs are going to be replaced by AI apart from his. And another headline talking about good old Mark Zuckerberg saying that the way that they're going to deal with the crisis that's like so many young men don't have any friends is they're going to provide them with AI friends. These seem like insane headlines to me, and but there's a strong suggestion at the moment. You kind of see it in the newspapers, it's kind of in the air, that maybe nobody's going to have to create anything anymore. Maybe nobody's going to have to do anything anymore. There aren't going to be any jobs. We can just stop and not do anything. And if that's the case, there's a good question about whether that's going to be good for us if we just stop and not do anything, or is it really that we create things for some other reason rather than just to get paid or for any kind of like extrinsic value? Is there any other value in doing those things? And then there's a final reason why now, which is, and I'm going to try and explain this more when I talk about the Buscuit Tin and the Biscuit, is that the Buscuit Tin is a description of something, the biscuit is a real thing. There's a really, really important sense in which AI is all Buscuit Tin. It's all description. It doesn't really care about what happens in the world. And so that's why now. Why this? Why am I going to tell you the things that I'm going to tell you? Well, as I said, I wrote a book. And when I was writing that book, I came across this idea kind of via a very peculiar route. I was reading a book which really I shouldn't have been reading because I don't understand enough about mathematics. I was reading a book about something called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and one of the things that it was talking about in this book is that numbers and descriptions of numbers are made of different stuff. And this seemed to me like a really, really powerful idea, that things and descriptions of things are not made of the same stuff. Now, I've been writing a book about project management, and this came to me as like a really, really important realization, but it's one of those things, it's like asking a fish how the water is. The fish swims in the water all the time. Maybe you can't really notice that there is any water. This kind of difference between ideas and things is something that we're working with all the time, and so maybe we can't even notice that it's there. But this is kind of a really, really important difference, and so that's what I'm going to talk about. That's what the rest of the talk's going to be about. But before I move on, I'm just going to have a last kind of aspect, a last kind of section on my introduction, which is what's at stake. If you don't listen to what I'm telling you, or you don't understand what I'm telling you, why does it matter? What won't be as good? What will go wrong if you don't understand this thing that I'm trying to tell you? And I think what's at stake is, if you don't understand that when you try and create something, when you try and take an idea and make it into a real thing, you will encounter problems. And as I'm going to explain, a lot of those problems are to do with like emotions around what happens when you start trying to turn an idea into a reality. Then very often what will happen is you will stop, you will give up at a point where otherwise maybe you could continue and you could get to something that was valuable. So that's what's at stake. So what am I going to talk about today? I've kind of trailed it a little bit. This is this idea of a biscuit tin and a biscuit, and this is kind of a food analogy. As you'll see, that I'm quite keen on food analogies. And when I was writing this show, I started to realise, oh my God, there's an entire TV show about this. There's an entire TV show about trying to turn a description of a biscuit into a biscuit, and it's now on its 25th or 26th series, and it's called The Great British Bake Off. And that's exactly what that show is. It's like, episode after episode, somebody says, I'm going to make this biscuit. Sometimes it's cake, sometimes it's pie. Okay, it's like it strays a bit from that kind of biscuit. And then they try and make that biscuit, and then somebody comes round and judges them on their ability to actually make that biscuit. And this is an emotional business. This is the crucial thing. This is an emotional business. Now, when you think about it, if you state it in its most barest terms, you think, how on earth can this be? How on earth can this be something that people cry about, that people laugh about, that kind of other people watch, people crying and laughing about? How can that be something that anybody gets excited about? It just so happens that, like, just before I came to do this performance tonight, I saw a story, and I think it might have been because I've been searching around biscuits. I don't know, maybe it overheard me talking about British Bake Off. That the first set of presenters, when contestants got too emotional and too upset, the presenters would deliberately swear during those shots, so those shots couldn't be used on the TV, to save the kind of blushes and save the embarrassment of the people who are involved in making biscuits. Right? So you've got to ask yourself the question: if people can get that emotional and that upset about just making biscuits, how much more emotional and how much more upset might they be about other things that are maybe more important to them in their lives. And so, I've been a project manager for 15 years. Some of the projects I'm working on, they're vital to the organisations I'm working for. Some of these projects, the careers of the people who are involved in them, will be ruined or made depending on whether these projects succeed, right? So there's lots and lots of scope, and the crucial thing is there's lots and lots of scope for this thing called emotion. What happens when you try and turn a description of something into something is that you get lots and lots of emotions. And another crucial aspect of this, you see that I kind of use lots of food analogies, is that essentially whenever you try and do this, whenever you try and turn a description of something into something, things go wrong. And I was reading a book about this, and it just so happened that I was reading this book after lunch. And the book was saying, well, it's really, really important to understand the difference between real things and things that don't exist. And how might you do this? And it asked you as the reader to carry out a thought experiment. And the thought experiment was, think of something that really happened in your last day or so. In the last day or so to you, think about something that really happened. Now think about something else that didn't happen, but that other thing that didn't happen, it shouldn't be a wild, crazy thing. It should be a thing of like the same kind of level of ordinariness, right? So if you went down the road to the post office and you walked down the road to the post office, the other thing shouldn't be that you flew down to the post office on a jetpack, right? The two things should be different. And then what the book said was, now look at the difference between these two things. In your mind's eye, how do you know that one of these things happened and the other one didn't? And as I said, it was after lunch when I was doing this. So I was thinking, well, I had chicken soup for lunch. And the other thing, the kind of thing that didn't happen, I thought, well, I could have had a bacon sandwich. I like bacon sandwiches. I try not to eat a bacon sandwich every day because it's bad for my weight. And I am a fat Yorkshireman. So, what is the difference between the two? And then I had a real kind of realization, which is, I know that one of these is real and the other one isn't, because I spilt chicken soup on my shirt. Something went wrong. And this is a crucial thing about trying to turn an idea into a reality. When that happens, something goes wrong. And the result of this is emotions. We have emotions. And this triggered something else for me, which was a memory of another book that I read, written by a lady called Arlie Russell Hochschild. And I can't exactly remember the name of the book, I need to look it up. But she talks about this thing called emotional labour, which I'm going to talk about just for a little bit now. Now, when I talk about emotional labour, there's a joke here. When I talk about emotional labour, I don't mean what happened when my mum gave birth to me, which is the nurses warned them about me being red-haired. It's a ginger. Now, my mum was fine with that because my dad was a ginger. I don't know if in the past nurses have encountered problems. 13 years later, when I went back to have an appendectomy, the same nurses were saying, we don't like gingers, they bleed. It's like, don't all your patients bleed? I don't think that's a supernatural quality. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the work that you have to do on the emotions that you experience when you do something. And we see that with like the British Bake Off. We see people being really, really pleased and pretending not to be because they know it's going to upset other people, or being really, really upset and pretending not to be because they don't want to be embarrassed. And so emotional labour is not just about like having to deal with the emotions you have, it's about trying to come up with other emotions or blocking off those emotions that you've kind of got for other reasons. Like, so that's a lot of work. One of the interesting things about, so Arlie Russell Hochschild talks about air hostesses and air stewards and doctors and accountants and all sorts of professional people who have to adopt a certain kind of emotional approach to the things that they're dealing with. So, so if you're a doctor and you're telling people that they've only got 6 weeks to live all day, you can't yourself be an emotional wreck. You have to maintain some kind of composure. If you're an air hostess and you're dealing with drunks who are being obnoxious, you can't really be obnoxious back. You have to carry on being pleasant. And there's something very intriguing in the research that Hochschild talks about, which is that the people who deal with this best are people who come up with some way of having the right kind of attitude to the emotions that they deal with, coming up with a way of seeing the situation so that they aren't always permanently angry with the drunks who are on the aeroplane, or they aren't always permanently devastated at the fact that they're telling people that they've only got 6 weeks to live. So this is a really, really good insight, because what it's saying is a lot of work is emotional and a lot of emotions are work. And this kind of really throws light on why when people start to do things, when people are doing creative things, they give up. Because essentially what they're doing is they're walking into a load of work. They're creating work for themselves, so they get excited about doing something like, I'll be a singer and I'll be on top of the pops and I'll be famous and I'll be rich, or I'll write a book, and that'll be a really straightforward thing, and it won't be enormous amounts of work, and it won't be humiliating at any stage, right? But actually what people experience when they do this is they experience lots and lots of emotions and lots of difficulties. Now it just so happens that in the audience I've got somebody who was asking me, well, you've got to give some examples from your own life if you're talking about these difficult emotions. He gave the example of learning to play squash and playing against somebody who was really good, and then kind of thinking, well, I'm doing pretty good here, and then finding out that the person he was playing against was playing with the wrong hand just to give him a chance. And I came up with an example just recently, which is I've been learning languages is must be one of the most common ways that people start something and then give up. I've been learning Greek in some kind of form for 30 years. I've been married to my wife 20 years now. And at one point I decided it'd be quite a good idea to do some exams. And I went along to this exam, and most of the people in the UK who were doing exams at the level I was doing them would be 12 or 13 years old. They're kids of Greek parents, and they often go to a school on the weekend to learn Greek. And so the room that we went into, the invigilator's room, the exam room, had small chairs and small tables. And I wasn't quite sitting with my knees around my ears, but I was sitting kind of slightly in a kind of the opposite of an elevated situation, like a kind of a lowered situation. And my knees were grazing the underside of the table. But of course, some 12, 13-year-old boys have shot up like beanpoles. And so there was a discussion went on in the corner of the room with the invigilators, and they gestured towards what I realised was a bunch of big boy tables and big boy chairs. And then they moved some furniture around. And this was the humiliation. I didn't get a big boy table or a big boy chair. They looked at me and decided I was fine sitting on a chair intended for a 12-year-old. Now the interesting thing about that story is I failed that exam. That's not the bit that smarts. The bit that smarts is not getting the big boy chair. So the thing is, like, in doing anything, there are all these kind of emotions. There's all this work that we have to deal with. Often what happens when we get to this point is we give up. And I haven't done a Greek exam since. I'm determined I will do one and pass it next time. We give up, or there are some other things that we do that kind of, they're not giving up. They're actually subtle ways of doing something that's pretty much equivalent of giving up. But we can tell ourselves that we're actually keeping going. So, when I first moved to London, I lived in North London, and I ended up doing an improvised theatre course. It seems like some kind of rule that you have to do one if you live in North London. And I read some of the books associated with the improvisation course that I was doing, and I read a book by a guy called Keith Johnston, who was a kind of pioneer of improvised theatre in the 1950s. And he gives an example of, let's say you have 4 people, just checking the time. Let's say you have 4 people, and they're on an improv stage, and they ask for a suggestion from the audience of somewhere where they might all be working. And somebody says, a tall ship, a sailing ship, an old-fashioned sailing ship. And so they're on the deck of this sailing ship, and somebody puts up a fake telescope to their eye and says, oh look, over there on the horizon, there's a ship with a skull and crossbones. I think that's a pirate ship. Now, in improv terms, this is known as an offer. This is somebody suggesting a direction in which the story might go. And once that's been mentioned, once somebody's mentioned pirate ship, the audience want to see a pirate. They want to see a movie cliche of a pirate, which is somebody who's got a parrot on one shoulder, who's got one eye, and he's got one leg and a wooden leg. It's like, I don't know why somebody's decided that's what a pirate looks like. It's like a really, really bruising attack on a pet shop, followed by a visit to an antique shop. But that's what everybody wants to see. But very often what actually happens is something different. Somebody will say something like, let's scrub the decks. And the other people on the stage, nobody's discussed this, but the other people on the stage will say, or sometimes they will say, yes, let's. And they'll all start scrubbing the decks. Now, this is really interesting because this doesn't move the story forward. It doesn't give the audience what they want. But the people who are doing it feel safe doing it. And Johnston calls this agreed activity. And this is something that very often we see people do. I see it all the time when I'm doing project management. And I think there are ways of doing it as well. I think I'm being guilty of it in my writing, which is not moving something forward. Just kind of doing something at the same level over and over again. So just endlessly writing diary entries and not ever trying to turn them into something, for example, is like one way I think I've done it. And essentially what it looks like work, but it's not hard work, and it never moves anything forward. It never actually advances something. There's another version of this, I think, which is even more subtle and insidious, and it's perfectionism. I will move forward to the next stage, I will push this on to the next stage, but only after I've got everything absolutely perfect. Only after everything is absolutely right will I move things to the next stage. That's really just another form of scrubbing the decks. And so the question is, and this is a question that I've been struggling with, I think, a long time, is how can you get through that? How can you get through when you encounter all of this work and in some senses you're stuck? How can you get through that and move to the next stage? And I think I've got an answer, but it involves 3 different things that I'm going to need to talk about. One is that you need to understand what your limits are. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to... Have you got a PhD in physics?
Yeah. Semiconductor, physics, yeah. Okay.
So you can probably tell me, I got this idea from my O-level physics teacher, Mr. North, who had us do this in class, right? So can you tell me what the physical definition of work is? I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot there.
Force times distance.
Force times distance traveled, yeah. So, if I've got a stool here, and I'm kind of putting it next to this pillar, and you'll see why in a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a force. I apply a force because I'm a fat Yorkshireman, so I'm going to step up onto this stool. I'm going to travel a distance. Now, what is power?
Okay, force times distance divided by
Yes.
Divided by time, yeah.
Yes. I think you might be the first person I've ever talked to who's got both of those answers right. But yes, so the number of times that I can do this in 30 seconds will give me an indication of my power for doing that work in 30 seconds, right? Have you got a phone on you, Andrew? Or have you got something you can time something?
Wait, hang on a sec. Right, what do you want?
30 seconds. Yeah, stopwatch for 30 seconds or
Okay.
timer for 30 seconds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to step up and down as many times as I can in 30 seconds. I'll do the counting. You can count with me if you want, but please stop after 30 seconds. Because
Okay,
I know.
I'll shout stop after 30 seconds.
Right, are you ready?
Yeah.
Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 12, 13, 14.
30 seconds.
Right, okay.
You were lucky. I was considering being a real bastard and just letting you go and see when you stopped.
So when I did this on Friday, I did 13. So I've improved slightly. Now the interesting thing about that demonstration is that's my power at that particular activity. And always at the end of it, when I'm explaining what this is, I'm always slightly out of breath as I put my shoes on. Now, but the interesting thing is to ask, if somebody was to say to me, or if I were to say to myself, because I was trying to kind of inspire myself or something, well, 14 is not good enough, you should be doing 28. What would happen? Now, if somebody else said it to me, like in a work situation, I might cheat, I might quit, or I might really, really hurt myself trying to kind of meet this kind of impossible schedule. If I'm doing it to myself, something very similar might happen. So I could kid myself that I'm working when I'm not working. I could give up because I think that's just impossible. Or I could really, really hurt myself trying to do something which is actually not a reasonable amount of effort that I can put into something. So this is my power stepping up and down on stools, which is a slightly artificial exercise. But this kind of is the same for various kinds of things in creative work and in various kind of endeavours. So, and this is something that I've done several times when I've been writing. So I'm going to definitely write 1,000 words a day. And the result is you do it for a few days and then you stop because it's not a viable kind of rate of progress. Or I kind of write something that I know is never going to be publishable because I just want to kind of get my 1,000 words, so I cheat in some way. This is kind of really relevant because I kind of put it together with something else that I read, which is I was reading a book, and I was reading this book for the third time, and I realised that every time that I read this book, I kind of completely agreed with what I was reading about in this book. I will get up and stamp it, but I should tie my shoes. I completely agreed with what was in this book, and I kind of completely said, yes, definitely I'm going to do this. And then I didn't do it. And it was only kind of very recently that I put these two things together. This idea that we have a kind of capacity for doing things, and also there are some things that are like a really good idea, but we don't do them. And I sort of kind of, it dawned on me, you know, it's one of those, I think of them as like forehead slapping moments, when I kind of go, yes, of course. The reason that I hadn't done the thing that was in this book is because I could only do little bits of it. It was a really good idea, but I couldn't just do all of it all the time. So I need to tell you what that thing is now. So this is a book called Presence by a woman called Patsy Ruddenberg. Patsy Ruddenberg is a voice coach, and she did lots and lots of work with the Royal Shakespeare Company. She did lots of work with actors, and she wrote a book called The Right to Speak, which is all about finding your voice. It's not a political book in terms of kind of like freedom of speech. It's a book about finding your own voice and being able to use it. And this book it's called Presence. It's got different names in the US and the UK. She talks about 3 different ways of communicating, and I'm going to talk about this in a slightly odd order, because I'm going to talk about what she calls third circle first. Now, third circle is shouting. It's pushing things forward. It's forcing what you've got to say on other people. It is assertive. Now, I'm making it sound maybe kind of unpleasant and kind of brash. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes we have to shout to be heard. Sometimes we need to be forceful. But it's kind of exhausting for us if that's all we are ever doing. And it's also exhausting for other people who are listening to it. So that's kind of like third circle communication. First circle communication is a kind of opposite of third circle communication. Third circle communication is kind of in some ways la la la, not listening. It's like not listening to anybody else. It's talking to yourself, it's muttering to yourself, or it's just shutting up and not really paying attention to anything that's around you. Now obviously, well, you might be guessing that there's something that is in the middle between these two. And the thing that's in the middle between these two is what's called second circle, which is conversation. It's preparing to be changed by what you hear. It's being prepared to kind of tell what you want to tell, but not in a kind of forced way, but in a kind of gentle and measured way. It's entering into a discussion. And the interesting thing about this second circle is entering into a discussion is that I think that you can think about lots and lots of situations where, yes, there are kind of actual dialogues that you want to kind of be involved with people, but also kind of entering into a discussion with the difficulties that you encounter when you try and do something creatively, like understanding what they are, recognizing what they are, and then entering into some kind of discussion with them. And also kind of what I realized was that one of the things that I'd always really struggled with my writing, which was editing. I'd always really hated editing. And what I kind of realized that editing was entering into a discussion with the stuff that I'd already written. And there are a bunch of things that I've managed to do recently that have made that more possible. One of them is, somebody's a member of the audience, so kind of like is having somebody read what I've written on a regular basis and kind of entering into an actual discussion about what I've written.
Yep, I find it useful too.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing is this I found out completely by accident, which is part of the reason that I'm carrying on doing fringe shows, I think, is that when I started to do my first fringe show in 2023, I didn't have a venue. I really went off completely half-cocked and disorganised, and I went to Edinburgh without a venue. I had this idea that kind of in the second 2 weeks of the fringe, in the final 2 weeks of the fringe, people would cancel their venues and I'd be able to get hold of one. That worked for one night only. I didn't manage it for the rest of it. And so what I started doing was I started talking on the Meadows, which is a big park in Edinburgh. I just started talking into a camera on the Meadows. And one of the things I found was that doing that allowed me to enter into some kind of discussion with the material that I was talking about in a way that I never really managed to do if it's all on the page. If it's all on the page and it's already kind of stuck, I can't really do that as easily as doing it via talking. So I found a kind of different method. But then the third thing, which really connects with second circle and also connects with stepping up and down off of the chair, is that I started to write every morning, but I didn't set myself any kind of ridiculous goals for that. But the only goal, the only kind of requirement was that I did it every day. And one of the things that really helped with that then was that I could start to do editing as part of that process. So these are two things that I think are part of how you actually can solve the difficulty of when you try and change from a description of a biscuit to a biscuit. You get this wave of emotions, those emotions at work, and very often what you do is you either pretend you're moving forward when you're not really, or you give up. And the way that you can do that is understand that you only have a certain kind of capacity. You can maybe develop that a little bit. So on Friday I did 13 step-ups on this chair. Today I did 14. You could maybe hope to get to 15 and 16, but that's about the level that you've got. So understanding what your actual capacity is in this area. Another thing is to focus on actually entering into a discussion with the things that are the difficulty. And I think there's an essay there somewhere talking about this second circle and its connection with, there's something in Zen, so there's a book called Zen and the Art of Archery, where he talks about waiting patiently and seeing what comes, remaining in a state of highest tension. I think that's the same kind of thing, the second circle. There's in the gentle art of conversational self-defense, Suzette Hayden Elgin, I think her name is, she talks about information mode, which is a mode where the two people who've been in conflict actually start exchanging information with each other. So I think there are a bunch of things that are kind of dancing around the same kind of area. But then there's a final thing which doesn't quite fit with those two things that I've talked about. So the things that I've talked about there as part of the solution are entering into conversation with the difficulties, understanding what your capacity is, and yes, working to increase it, but not crazily saying it should be twice as fast or whatever. And the third thing is that sooner or later with some things, you have to say, fuck it. Some things you will not get past in a measured and careful way. Some things you just have to shrug your shoulders and understand that what you do will result in further emotional conflict, will result in further emotional difficulties, but you have to do it anyway. And this is something that I realised from my work, again in project management, is that none of those projects, very often, would ever get off the ground unless somebody was just prepared to shrug their shoulders and go, yeah, fuck it, we're going to do this. If we actually did things in a careful and measured way all of the time, we wouldn't really get anything done. And so what I'm going to do in this final bit is something that's slightly kind of woo-woo, but I found it very effective in the past. Actually, I found it too effective once. I tried this exercise with my wife when we were out at dinner, and she kind of just said, oh yeah, fuck it, and told me everything that was bothering her about me at the time, which was like more than I expected, I've got to say. So I'm going to do this activity now. I will just say this is I first heard of this activity by a chap called Richard Bandler. Many people think the man is a charlatan and a rogue, and I don't have any time for anything that he does, but I think this one particular activity is very interesting. And so what I want you to do is to just think of something that in some creative endeavor that you're doing, or in anything that you're doing, you've got stuck at some point. You've got stuck at this point. And then I just want you to think now, I want you to think about this thing that you've got that you're stuck with. And I want you to think, why am I hesitating? And just bring this thing up to the point where you hesitate. So think about this thing and think about the point that you get to where you hesitate. And now I want you to imagine kind of like a kind of Wi-Fi dial. What's the kind of strength of that hesitation when you get to that point? Is it kind of 6 on the kind of hesitation scale? We just made the hesitation scale. If it is, I want you to turn it up to like 7, and then kind of turn it up to 8, and then turn it up to 9, and then finally turn it up to like maximum hesitation. So you can feel this kind of like jerking kind of hesitation when you get to this point. And then I want you to kind of blast past that and just feel the frustration that you're not getting past this thing. Feel how frustrated you are that you're not getting past this thing. You're hesitating and now you're frustrated. And again, how frustrated are you? It's like that Wi-Fi dial is a 7 in terms of frustration. If you turn it to 8, so you're really frustrated. 9, you're so frustrated that you can't get past this point. 10, and again, like when you get to 10, I want that frustration to devolve into impatience. You've just had it now. You've had it that you're stuck at this point, and like you're impatient. And again, kind of like, maybe you're like impatient at a level of 6. You drift this up to 7. You take it to 8. You take it to 9. And then when the impatience reaches 10, you just go, fuck it. Fuck it. I am going to do this. So that seems like a very good point to stop. Because I can let you go out of this room and go off and do whatever that thing was that you're going to do. That was the show. Thank you very much.